Hello, and welcome back to the Native English Podcast. I'm Mia, and I'm delighted you've decided to spend a little time with us today because we're about to explore a topic that most people experience every week without ever thinking about the language hidden inside it. Think about the last time you walked into a shop. Perhaps you intended to buy one simple item, yet 20 minutes later you found yourself standing in front of something completely different, wondering whether it was worth taking home. Shopping has an interesting way of changing our minds. We enter with one plan, discover unexpected possibilities, reconsider our choices, and sometimes leave with something we never imagined buying. When you look closely, it becomes much more than a financial transaction. It's a sequence of decisions, small discoveries, moments of hesitation, and occasional excitement. That is why shopping provides such a fascinating opportunity for improving your English. Every decision creates a new reason to communicate, and every conversation reflects what is happening in your mind at that moment. Today, rather than memorizing another collection of vocabulary, we're going to experience that journey together and discover how natural English grows from real situations instead of isolated word lists.
That is interesting, and one of the reasons I enjoy this topic is that it reminds us language is connected to everyday life, not only to classrooms or grammar books. Whenever people visit a market, a department store, or a small local shop, they are constantly observing, evaluating, imagining, and responding to what they see. Those mental shifts influence the language they choose, often without them even noticing. Native speakers rarely think, which advanced word should I use next? They simply allow their vocabulary to follow the situation naturally. That's the approach we'll take throughout today's conversation. We'll move through a complete shopping experience together, pausing whenever an important moment introduces a more expressive verb that fits the situation. By the end, you'll have something far more valuable than 15 words to memorize. You'll have a practical way of thinking that makes those words easier to remember and far easier to use when you need them most. And if you enjoy learning English through meaningful conversations like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the Native English Podcast so you never miss a new episode.
That's a wonderful way to approach today's lesson because it reminds us that shopping doesn't truly begin when we decide to spend money. In many cases, it begins with curiosity. Some of my favorite shopping experiences have ended without a single purchase, and surprisingly, I never considered those trips a waste of time. There's something enjoyable about walking through a bookshop, wandering around a weekend market, or stepping into a clothing store simply to see what catches your attention. Without any pressure to make a decision, your mind becomes more open. You notice colors you wouldn't normally choose, designs you've never seen before, and ideas you might even use in the future. That relaxed attitude changes the entire experience because you stop focusing on ownership and start appreciating discovery. This is where English becomes far more interesting than many learners expect. Instead of saying, "I looked around the shop," native speakers often choose a verb that reflects their purpose. If they're moving casually from one section to another with no fixed destination, they might say they were browsing. That single choice immediately tells the listener they weren't searching with urgency. They were allowing themselves to enjoy the process. If they become interested in a new department or an unfamiliar brand, they may describe that experience by saying they decided to explore it. The atmosphere suddenly feels more vivid because the language follows the experience instead of simply reporting it.
You've made a good distinction because those verbs reveal intention as much as action. Imagine two people entering the same department store. Both walk through identical aisles, both spend the same amount of time inside, and both leave without carrying any shopping bags. From the outside, their behavior appears identical, yet their experiences may be completely different. One person is browsing, enjoying the freedom to look around without expectations. The other is exploring, driven by genuine interest in discovering something unfamiliar or inspiring. Then another subtle moment appears, and this one often passes unnoticed. Perhaps a beautifully designed watch catches your eye, an unusual lamp reminds you of your childhood home, or a handmade leather bag stands out among dozens of ordinary products. At that moment, you don't simply see the item, you notice it. That verb carries the idea that something has earned your attention naturally. Native speakers rely on these small differences because they allow listeners to picture the experience almost as if they were walking through the store themselves. As we continue our journey, you'll discover that every thoughtful decision inside a shop has its own vocabulary, and those carefully chosen verbs quietly transform ordinary conversations into stories people genuinely enjoy listening to.
Great, Max. That idea of turning ordinary moments into vivid stories naturally leads to the next stage of the shopping experience, because eventually something captures your interest strongly enough to make you stop walking. It could be a pair of trainers, a coffee machine, a leather handbag, or even a simple notebook that somehow feels different from all the others. Then, a quiet conversation begins inside your own mind. You start asking questions that no salesperson can answer for you. Is this better than the one I saw a few minutes ago? Will it still be useful 6 months from now? Is the quality worth the price, or am I simply reacting to attractive packaging? Suddenly, shopping becomes much less about finding an item and much more about making a thoughtful decision. This is where the verb compare becomes incredibly valuable. When you compare two products, you aren't choosing one immediately, you're placing them side by side, weighing their strengths, noticing their differences, and deciding which one deserves your confidence. Native speakers use this verb because it reflects a careful process rather than a quick reaction. They understand that confident shoppers rarely rush from interest to purchase. Instead, they allow themselves time to think, because good decisions usually grow from patience rather than impulse.
I like that perspective because comparison is only the beginning of deeper evaluation. After you've decided that 2 or 3 options are worth your attention, your focus naturally becomes much more detailed. Instead of looking at the product as a whole, you begin to examine it. You might examine the stitching on a jacket, the material of a backpack, the screen quality of a tablet, or the ingredients listed on a food label. The purpose is no longer simple curiosity, it's verification. You're searching for evidence that supports your decision or warns you to walk away. Then comes another thoughtful stage that many learners overlook in conversation. Before reaching for your wallet, you usually consider whether the purchase truly belongs in your life. Perhaps you already own something similar, perhaps your budget has changed, or perhaps another priority deserves your attention first. That verb suggests quiet reflection rather than visible action, and it appears constantly in everyday English because people regularly consider possibilities before making commitments. Together, compare, examine, and consider reveal that shopping is as much an exercise in judgment as it is in spending money. The more accurately your verbs reflect that thinking process, the more naturally your English communicates not only what you did, but also why you chose to do it.
Once you've reflected on value, quality, and practicality, something interesting begins to happen. One option slowly separates itself from the rest, not because it's objectively perfect, but because you begin to picture it as part of your own life. I think that's the moment shopping becomes surprisingly personal. A coat is no longer hanging on a display. You imagine wearing it on a winter morning. A backpack is no longer sitting on a shelf. You picture it accompanying you on your next journey. Before making any decision, many people naturally want to try on an item, especially when clothing, shoes, or accessories are involved. That simple action is about much more than checking the size. You're discovering how the item feels, how comfortably you can move, and whether it gives you the confidence you were hoping for. Sometimes you step in front of a mirror and smile without even realizing it. Other times you immediately know something isn't quite right, even if the measurements are technically correct. That's why I think shopping often tells us as much about ourselves as it does about the products we encounter. We aren't simply collecting possessions, we're searching for things that genuinely reflect who we are and how we want to present ourselves.
I completely agree, and that naturally introduces another verb that carries far more meaning than many learners realize. After you try on a jacket or a pair of shoes, a native speaker might say, "It really suits you." That's an important expression because suit isn't talking about physical size. Instead, it suggests that the color, style, design, or overall appearance matches your personality, your lifestyle, or even the occasion you have in mind. An item can fit perfectly and still not suit you, while another may immediately feel as though it belongs in your wardrobe because it complements who you are. Eventually, every thoughtful journey reaches its conclusion, and that's where the verb choose becomes meaningful. We don't simply choose because we've reached the end of the shopping trip. We choose because our observations, comparisons, careful examination, and personal reflections have gradually built enough confidence to support a decision. That final verb represents the outcome of everything that came before it. It isn't a hurried reaction or a lucky guess. It's the quiet satisfaction of recognizing that one option aligns with your needs,
your preferences, and your sense of identity. When your English captures that emotional progression, your listener understands not only which product you selected, but also the story behind your decision. Once you've reached that point of confidence, another part of the experience quietly begins. And I think many learners overlook it because their attention stays fixed on the product itself. In reality, shopping is also about communication. Even when you found something you genuinely like, questions still appear. You may wonder whether another color is available, whether your size is still in stock, or whether the same item comes with different features. Those moments often lead to a conversation with a sales assistant, and I actually enjoy them because they can completely change the direction of a purchase. There have been times when I almost walked away, only to discover that another version of the product suited my needs much better after speaking with someone who understood the collection. In situations like these, you'll often hear the verb recommend. You might ask, which one would you recommend for everyday use? Or could you recommend something that's easier to maintain? That single question opens the door to advice instead of guesswork. Sometimes the answer solves a problem you didn't even know you had. At other times, you realize you need more time to think, and that's perfectly normal. Shopping doesn't always reward quick decisions, and allowing yourself space to reflect can be just as valuable as making an immediate purchase.
That's true, and those conversations become even more practical when you're not ready to take the item home straight away. Imagine you found the perfect jacket, but you need to discuss it with a family member, measure the space for a piece of furniture, or simply sleep on the decision before spending a significant amount of money. Instead of hoping the product will still be available tomorrow, many native speakers ask whether the store can reserve it for them. By using the verb reserve, you're politely requesting that the item be kept aside for a short period, giving you time to decide without losing the opportunity altogether. If everything feels right after that final reflection, the journey reaches its natural conclusion with the verb purchase. Although buy is completely correct, purchase often appears in more formal conversations, business settings, and customer service interactions. More importantly, it carries the sense that the decision has been made thoughtfully rather than impulsively. You aren't simply exchanging money for an object, you're completing a process that has involved curiosity, careful observation, detailed evaluation, personal preference, and meaningful conversation. That's why these interactions matter so much. Sometimes the words you exchange with the person working in the store influence your decision just as much as the product sitting in front of you.
Even after all that careful thinking, meaningful conversations with the staff, and the satisfaction of making a well-considered purchase, the story doesn't always end when you leave the store. I think that's something many of us have experienced, at least once. You arrive home feeling pleased with your decision, only to discover a day or two later that reality is slightly different from what you expected. Perhaps the shoes become uncomfortable after walking for an hour, the lamp doesn't match the color of your living room, or the headphones sound wonderful in the shop but aren't practical for your daily commute. None of those situations necessarily mean you made a bad decision. They simply remind us that some products reveal their true value only after we begin using them in everyday life. What's encouraging is that this doesn't have to become an awkward experience. Instead, it creates another opportunity to communicate clearly and confidently. If the item genuinely isn't right for you, you can politely explain the situation and ask whether you may return it. That verb is one every English learner should feel comfortable using because it appears so naturally in shops around the world. Returning an item isn't admitting failure, it's simply recognizing that your needs and the product were not the perfect match after all.
That's a valuable way to look at it because once you begin that conversation, the next step depends on what you hope to achieve. Sometimes the product itself is excellent, but one small detail needs to change. A different color might suit your room better. Another size may feel more comfortable, or an alternative model could include the features you originally wanted. In situations like these, native speakers often use the verb exchange. By asking to exchange an item, you're saying, "I'd like to replace this with another option," rather than ending the shopping experience altogether. There are also occasions when replacing the product simply isn't the right solution, and that's when another important word appears: refund. If the store agrees to provide a refund, it means your payment is returned because the purchase is being canceled. Notice how each verb represents a completely different outcome, even though they all begin with the same problem. Confident English speakers choose these words carefully because they make their intentions immediately clear while keeping the conversation polite and respectful. In the end, effective communication isn't measured by whether everything goes perfectly. It's measured by your ability to handle unexpected situations calmly, express yourself with precision, and leave the conversation feeling that both you and the other person understood one another.
As we come to the end of today's conversation, I'd love to bring everything together through one simple story. Imagine it's Saturday morning and you've decided to visit a newly opened shopping center. You don't have a strict shopping list because you're happy to browse and enjoy whatever catches your attention. As you move from one store to another, you decide to explore a home decor shop you've never visited before. A beautifully designed reading lamp notices, or rather catches, your eye, and you pause to take a closer look. Nearby, another lamp offers similar features, so you compare both models before making any decision. After that, you examine the materials, the finish, and the brightness settings because you want something that will last for years. Even then, you don't rush. You consider where the lamp will sit in your living room and whether it truly fits the atmosphere you're trying to create. Before leaving, you also walk into a clothing store, try on a lightweight jacket, realize that the color really suits you, and finally choose it after feeling completely comfortable with your decision. Since you're still unsure about the lamp, you ask a member of staff to recommend the most reliable model and politely request that they reserve it until the following afternoon. The next day, you return feeling confident and happily purchase both items.
A week later, you discover that the jacket has become one of your favorite pieces of clothing, but the lamp doesn't produce the warm light you expected in the evenings. Instead of feeling disappointed, you return to the store and calmly explain the situation. The assistant understands your concern and offers to exchange the lamp for another model with a softer light. But after seeing the alternatives, you realize none of them match your space as well as you had hoped. You politely ask whether a refund would be possible, and the conversation ends on a positive note because everyone understands exactly what outcome you're looking for. If you think back over that story, you'll probably notice something interesting. You didn't memorize 15 unrelated verbs today. You followed one complete experience, from curiosity to confidence, from careful reflection to practical decisions, and from unexpected challenges to satisfying solutions. That's often the easiest way to remember new vocabulary, because our minds naturally connect words with experiences rather than isolated lists. The next time you walk into a shop, I hope you'll recognize some of these moments and allow the right verb to appear naturally. If today's conversation helped you see shopping English from a completely new perspective, subscribe to the Native English podcast, share this episode with another English learner, and tell us in the comments which verb you're most excited to start using in real life.